In the heart of the antebellum South, where superstition often ruled as firmly as law, there lived a slave unlike any other. A man marked by an unusual birth defect, 6 fingers on one hand. His master, a wealthy but deeply superstitious plantation owner, was obsessed with omens, signs, and the whispers of fate. Every action, every coincidence, and every shadow seemed to carry hidden meaning to him. The slave with his extra finger became an object of fear and fascination, rumored among the servants to possess unnatural luck or misfortune. One fateful night, the plantation's fortune vanished almost as if carried away by the wind. Gold, silver, and valuables that had been counted and guarded for years disappeared without a trace. Panic and suspicion swept through the estate. The master, convinced that the incident was a sign from the supernatural, turned his gaze toward the slave with 6 fingers, seeing in him either a cursed presence or the key to a fortune lost. What followed was a tense, chilling interplay of fear, cunning, and the desperate pursuit of wealth that would leave no one unchanged. The slave with 6 fingers was born on a stormy night when lightning split the sky over the plantation like a jagged scar, and the cries of newborns mingled with the distant rumble of thunder. From the moment he came into the world, he was different. Not in a way that could easily be hidden, nor in a way that could be ignored. The midwife gasped when she counted his fingers and found 6 on his right hand. She muttered under her breath, unsure if the words were a blessing or a curse. The extra finger was small, oddly shaped, and yet it seemed almost purposeful, as though it had been designed to catch the attention of everyone who laid eyes on it. In a society where superstition ruled the hearts of many, and anything uncommon was often feared, the child's unusual trait was immediately noticed, and whispers began to ripple through the quarters like wind through dry leaves. From the earliest days of his life, the 6-fingered child was treated with a combination of fascination and suspicion. The older slaves spoke in hushed tones, exchanging glances when he entered a room, their eyes flicking to the extra finger as though it were a living omen. Some whispered that the child carried the power of misfortune with him, that the 6th finger was a sign of dark magic or unnatural destiny. Others, quieter and more secretive, suggested that he might be lucky, that he could one day possess abilities beyond comprehension, abilities that could protect or reward those who treated him well. The master's overseer, a rigid and fear-driven man, warned against paying too much attention to children with such anomalies, insisting that the plantation could not afford to indulge in foolish tales. Yet even he felt a chill run down his spine whenever he saw the child grasp a tool or reach for an object. As the boy grew, the presence of the 6th finger became more pronounced. It was not merely an appendage. It moved with dexterity that surprised everyone who watched him. He could grasp things with an ease and precision that no ordinary hand could manage. Cups, knives, tools, coins, even delicate objects that demanded careful balance, seemed to obey the movements of his hand in ways that startled observers. Among the other children, he became a figure of awe and trepidation. They would sometimes dare each other to watch him catch falling objects, and when he succeeded where others failed, they would whisper that he had been touched by something beyond the natural world. The master of the plantation, a man who carried a deep and unshakable belief in signs and omens, was intrigued from the first mention of the boy's condition. He ordered the overseer to bring the child to him, wanting to see for himself the anomaly that had the quarters buzzing with speculation. When he observed the boy, he ran his eyes over the hand with its extra finger, feeling an uneasy mix of fear and curiosity. He was convinced that nothing about this birth was ordinary. In his mind, the plantation was a place where the natural and the supernatural intersected, and this child could either be a harbinger of fortune, or a warning of impending disaster. The boy's mother, a quiet woman who had endured more suffering than most, watched silently, her face a mask of weary resignation. She had no power to protect her son from the scrutiny and the assumptions that would shape the rest of his life, but she loved him fiercely, silently promising herself that she would shield him from as much harm as possible. The quarters, the fields, the very atmosphere of the plantation seemed to react to the boy's presence. Other slaves would cross themselves when he approached, muttering prayers to ward off misfortune, while some touched the 6th finger gently when they thought no one was watching, as if its touch could bring protection or reveal secrets. Children who played with him learned quickly that his dexterity was unmatched, that he could build, create, and manipulate objects with a skill that seemed almost unnatural for his age. This skill, however, only intensified the aura of suspicion. The adults whispered that the child was different in a way that could not be explained by common sense or ordinary knowledge. Even the animals on the plantation seemed to respond to him differently. Dogs hesitated before approaching him, and horses shifted nervously under his gaze. It was as if the 6th finger, though small and innocuous in appearance, emitted a presence that animals and humans alike could sense. The master, who prided himself on understanding the signs of fate, began to pay close attention to the boy's action. He noted when crops grew unusually well in areas where the child had worked, or when minor accidents occurred that seemed inexplicable. Each event was catalogued in his mind as either confirmation or warning. His superstitious nature made him oscillate between admiration and fear. Was this child a blessing, sent by divine providence to favor the plantation, or was he a cursed figure, destined to bring ruin? Every small event was magnified, every glance from the boy scrutinized. The child's normal curiosity, his attempts to explore the world around him, were seen through a lens of portent and premonition. In the quarters, the boy began to develop a reputation. Older slaves would tell new arrivals about the six-fingered child, and the uncanny things he could do. They spun stories that grew taller with each retelling, that he could unlock doors without keys, that he could sense hidden treasures, that he could change the course of events with a mere touch of his hand. Whether these tales were true or exaggeration mattered little. They fed into a mythology that surrounded the boy, intertwining fear, respect and fascination. The child in turn became aware of the power his anomaly held over others. He noticed the way people reacted to his hands, the way even the most hardened adults hesitated before speaking openly in his presence. It was both a gift and a burden, a double-edged reality that shaped his identity from the earliest days of his life. As he grew older, the sixth finger became not just a physical feature but a symbol of everything the plantation feared and desired: luck, misfortune, power and the unknown. It marked him as different, a figure apart from ordinary men and women, and it drew both attention and scrutiny from all sides. Every task he performed, every small achievement, was measured against the expectations and superstitions of those around him. The plantation, already steeped in hierarchy and fear, became a stage where the boy's six fingers played a central role in a drama that would shape the lives of everyone who lived there. The master of the plantation was a man whose every decision, every glance and every movement was guided by fear of unseen forces. He believed that the world was alive with omens, spirits, and messages hidden in the smallest details of daily life. From the moment he awoke in the morning to the instant he lay down at night, he scanned the world for signs, reading coincidences as warnings and interpreting ordinary events as portents of either fortune or disaster. This superstitious nature shaped the entire rhythm of the plantation, affecting not only him, but everyone who worked under his gaze. No one could act freely without being measured against the invisible yardstick of his fear. He had his own private system of interpreting signs: the way a candle flickered, the manner in which birds landed on the veranda, the direction of the wind through the fields, or the sudden appearance of a cloud could all hold significance. A black cat crossing his path would halt his day in its tracks, and a broken tool could be more than an accident. It could be a warning that misfortune was approaching. He consulted dream interpreters, sometimes paying slaves who claimed knowledge of hidden truths, asking them to read omens in the shapes of smoke or the cracks of the earth. His fear of fate was obsessive, bordering on paranoia, and it intensified with every passing year, especially as the plantation prospered. The superstitious master was not cruel only in a physical sense, but also in the way he twisted belief into power. He used fear as a tool to maintain control, ensuring that his workers remained constantly aware of his watchful presence. His obsession with signs created a climate where silence and secrecy thrived. No one dared act without considering whether their actions might anger the spirits or draw the master's suspicion. Among the servants, his name became almost synonymous with dread, for even small mistakes could be interpreted as offenses against fate itself. Yet at the same time his careful attention to omens sometimes spared the more cautious slaves from punishment, as he was quick to reward those who appeared to be favored by fortune. The master's superstition had roots deep in his childhood. He had grown up hearing stories of witches, curses and enchanted objects, and he had internalized the belief that the world was full of hidden dangers and hidden rewards. Every unusual occurrence reinforced these lessons: a sudden illness, an unexpected windstorm, a servant who appeared to know too much, all became proof that forces beyond human understanding guided the world. By the time he inherited the plantation, he was already a man shaped entirely by these fears, and the vast wealth under his control only amplified the stakes. He felt that any misstep could provoke the wrath of unseen powers, costing him fortune, health or even life itself. It was this obsession that made him fixate on the six-fingered slave. He saw in the boy's unusual hand not merely a physical anomaly but a symbol, a sign that fate had placed within his various states. The extra finger seemed to him a message, and he spent hours observing the boy, noting every movement, every glance, every small success or failure. The superstitious master believed that if he could understand the boy, interpret the meaning of his anomaly, he could anticipate the whims of fate, and protect his wealth. To him the six fingers were a code, a living cipher written by the hand of destiny, and the boy himself was both key and warning. The master's routines became intertwined with his superstition. Before dawn he would walk the edges of the plantation, counting the birds, examining the sky, and muttering prayers to ensure the day would favor him. He believed that the morning signs foretold the fortunes or misfortunes of the hours to come. He insisted that the overseer and trusted slaves report every unusual occurrence, every accident, every misstep, no matter how small, because even the tiniest anomaly could hide a message from In his mind, the plantation was a living organism governed by forces he could interpret but never fully control, and the boy with 6 fingers was the most compelling evidence of that hidden order. The other slaves quickly learned that the master's superstitions were not to be questioned. Any attempt to reason with him about natural explanations for accidents or coincidences was met with suspicion or anger. They learned to speak carefully, to couch statements in words that would not invoke his fear, and to treat every unusual event as potentially significant. The plantation became a theater of superstition, with the master as the central actor interpreting omens, the overseer as his enforcer, and the slaves as both audience and participants in a ritual of constant vigilance. The master's obsession intensified as the boy grew. He noticed that when the child worked in the fields, crops sometimes thrived more than expected, while other sections faltered mysteriously. He observed that tools seemed to operate more efficiently in the boy's hands, and he began to see patterns where others saw only random. Each of these moments was catalogued and interpreted. To him, the boy was a living oracle, a conduit through which the secrets of fate could be glimpsed. His superstitious nature transformed ordinary work into a web of signs and consequences, where every task became charged with potential significance. At night, the master would lie awake in his chambers, recalling events from the day and searching for hidden meaning. He would replay the child's actions over and over in his mind, noting the subtle gestures of the 6 fingers, the manner in which they moved, the peculiar way the child grasped objects. Each detail could be a clue to impending fortune or disaster. He sometimes sent trusted men to observe the child when he was unaware, hoping to catch signs that would confirm his theories. Sleep for the master was never a refuge from fear. Dreams themselves were suspect, potential messages from forces beyond human understanding. The plantation's culture became shaped entirely by this obsession. The fear and reverence for omens extended beyond the master's private routines into the daily lives of everyone on the estate. Slaves whispered warnings to one another about unlucky moments, about things that must not be done lest the spirits become angered. Children grew up hearing stories of curses, hidden treasures, and signs carried in unusual features such as the boy's 6th finger. Even the overseers, who were supposed to maintain order, found themselves cautious, checking twice before punishing, wary of acting in ways that might provoke misfortune. The master's superstitions were not mere eccentricities. They were a lens through which he understood every event, every human interaction, and every movement on the plantation. They dictated policy, shaped behavior, and determined who would be punished or rewarded. The 6-fingered slave became a focal point for these beliefs, a living symbol of the master's fears and obsessions. Every day was a test of interpretation, a careful balancing act between belief and reality, and the tension it created affected every person on the estate. The rumors about the 6-fingered slave spread like wildfire through the quarters, carried by whispers, nods, and furtive glances. From the youngest children to the oldest laborers, everyone had something to say about him. Some spoke in awe, believing the extra finger marked him as someone extraordinary, someone chosen by forces beyond human comprehension. Others spoke in fear, convinced that the boy's unusual hand was a harbinger of misfortune, a curse that could fall upon anyone who crossed his path or drew the attention of fate itself. These stories, half-truths and half-imagination, gained traction not because of evidence but because of the climate of superstition that permeated the plantation, where every anomaly became a story, and every story gained weight as it passed from one mouth to another. The children who played in the quarters were the first to notice subtle differences. While other boys struggled to climb trees or catch thrown objects, the 6-fingered child seemed to possess an unnatural coordination, a precision that made ordinary games almost impossible to challenge him. When he reached for fruit from the orchard, or caught small tools tossed toward him, his 6th finger extended with effortless dexterity, adding a motion that seemed to defy common sense. The other children whispered among themselves, suggesting that the boy was touched by spirits, that he could see things they could not, that the extra finger was a window into a world beyond the ordinary. These whispers were carried on the wind, growing with each repetition, until even the adults began to hear of them and some allowed their imagination to run wild. Among the older slaves, the tales became more elaborate. They spoke of the boy in the same hushed tones reserved for dangerous secrets. Some claimed that he had the ability to find hidden objects that had been lost for weeks, that he could sense approaching danger before it arrived, and that the extra finger gave him a supernatural awareness of the world. Others warned against drawing too close to him, cautioning that even a casual touch could bring misfortune or mislead one into unseen peril. Every action the boy took became fodder for interpretation, a sign that could be read in multiple ways depending on one's fear or hope. The master himself fed into these rumors without intending to. His obsession with superstition and omens meant that he scrutinized the boy constantly. When a tool was dropped and the boy picked it up with unmatched skill, the master would see the hand's movement as proof of hidden intelligence, even otherworldly power. When a small accident occurred in the fields, the master sometimes assumed the boy had foreseen it, or caused it by some mystical influence. Regardless of the natural explanation, his fear and admiration became a lens through which others interpreted the boy's action. In such an environment, stories of supernatural ability were not just tolerated, they were amplified and given weight by authority. Some of the slaves were skeptical, but they dared not voice their doubt. Questioning the boy's mystical reputation risked drawing suspicion from both the master and the older, more superstitious workers. Silence was safer. As a result, the stories spread unchecked, growing more elaborate with every retelling. The extra finger, a small physical anomaly, became a symbol, a signifier of abilities, dangers, and unknown powers. Adults and children alike came to watch him in secret, fascinated by his movements, and fearful of the consequences of being noticed by someone who might have connections to fate itself. The boy himself was aware of the attention he attracted, though he did not fully understand the reason. He noticed the way people moved cautiously around him, the careful glances exchanged when he approached, and the whispers that stopped abruptly when he turned his head. There was a strange mixture of fear, respect, and curiosity that followed him everywhere. Sometimes he would experiment with the skill of his 6 fingers, testing how far he could push it, finding satisfaction in catching objects, or performing tasks others could not. He realized in some intuitive way that his anomaly had power, that it affected the thoughts and actions of those around him. This awareness, while nascent, gave him a sense of control in a world where control was rarely afforded to someone of his station. Over time, the superstitions surrounding the boy began to influence behavior on the plantation in subtle but important ways. Workers would avoid certain tasks in his presence, fearing that if something went wrong they would be blamed for offending forces beyond comprehension. Tools were sometimes offered to him first, not because he was stronger or more capable in the ordinary sense, but because it was believed that his hand could bring luck or prevent disaster. Children sought his favor, hoping to be seen as aligned with someone who might command the attention of fate. Even the animals seemed affected, hesitating at his approach or responding to his gestures in ways they did not to others. The rumors also created a sense of hierarchy among the slaves themselves. Older, more superstitious individuals claimed authority in interpreting the boy's actions, while others deferred to them, reluctant to risk displeasure from someone believed to be attuned to unseen forces. These internal dynamics added tension to the quarters. As fear and admiration intermingled, the 6-fingered slave became a figure who could not be ignored, who influenced the thoughts, actions, and beliefs of everyone around him even without speaking a word. His presence reshaped the social fabric of the plantation, transforming everyday interactions into a complex web of suspicion, reverence, and cautious calculation. The master's own fixation added to the weight of the rumors. Whenever a coincidence occurred, whether a crop thrived unexpectedly, an accident was narrowly avoided, or a servant experienced sudden luck, the master linked it to the boy. He would summon the overseer to report these events, and the story would circulate among the workers, growing in detail and speculation. Each new incident reinforced the mythos surrounding the 6-fingered slave, blending truth, exaggeration, and imagination into a narrative that seemed entirely plausible in the climate of superstition that dominated the plantation. Even as the boy grew, the rumors never faded. They intensified. Adolescents and adults alike claimed to see signs of foresight, dexterity, or influence in his action. People reported that he seemed to anticipate events before they happened, that he could manipulate objects in ways no ordinary hand could, and that his 6th finger held the secret of these abilities. These tales, though unverifiable, gained credibility simply because everyone else seemed to believe them. In a place where superstition dictated the rules of life, the belief itself became a kind of truth, and the 6-fingered slave became central to the plantation's collective imagination. In quiet moments, some of the older slaves would recount the stories of his early childhood, remembering the first time they noticed the unusual hand and the reactions it elicited. They spoke of awe,
fear and the uncanny feeling of being in the presence of someone touched by forces beyond the ordinary. These recollections passed from one generation of workers to the next, ensured that the reputation of the six-fingered slave would persist, growing ever larger with each retelling, until the line between fact and legend became impossible to discern.
The night the plantation's fortune vanished arrived without warning, wrapped in an eerie silence that seemed to swallow every sound. The usual nocturnal chorus of insects and animals had quieted, as if the world itself held its breath in anticipation of what was about to occur. Inside the master's house, servants moved cautiously, carrying lanterns whose flickering light cast long trembling shadows across the walls. The valuables, the gold coins stacked in small chests, silverware polished to a gleaming shine, rare trinkets collected over decades, and bundles of cash carefully hidden in drawers and secret compartments, were all supposed to be secure. Each had been counted and guarded with meticulous care, catalogued by the master himself. Yet despite every precaution, by morning nothing remained. The first sign of trouble came when the overseer, making his early rounds, discovered that the master's private study was empty of its usual treasures. At first he thought perhaps he had miscounted or that a chest had been misplaced. But as he searched the rooms, pantries, and hidden compartments, the horrifying truth became impossible to deny. Every item of value, some weighing dozens of pounds, some small enough to fit in a pocket, had disappeared. It was not a simple theft, nor a careless oversight. It was as if the wealth had evaporated into the night air. The overseer's face went pale and he ran to alert the master, whose own reaction was a mixture of disbelief, terror, and frantic calculation. When the master arrived, his first instinct was to blame the supernatural. For a man who had lived a lifetime guided by superstition, a theft of this magnitude without a trace could only be the work of fate, spirits, or dark forces at play. He paced the floor, muttering to himself, consulting the omens he had memorized and demanding explanations from the terrified overseer. No one could answer. No one had seen a shadow where there should have been light. No sound had been heard in the dead of night that could indicate human trespass, and no footprints or broken locks were found. It was as if the fortune had disappeared in a single impossible instant. Word of the disappearance spread quickly among the slaves, carried first by the overseer and then whispered from quarters to quarters. Fear rippled through the community, mingling with fascination and speculation. Some claimed they had seen unusual lights or figures moving in the night, though no one could say definitively what they were. Others suggested that the missing wealth was punishment for some unknown sin, a warning from higher powers that the master had ignored for too long. Stories grew, fed by imagination and dread, and the six-fingered slave soon found himself at the center of every rumor. People speculated that his unusual hand had a connection to the disappearance, that his very presence had somehow influenced the events of the night. The master's fear became an obsession. He summoned the overseer repeatedly, demanding exact accounts of every moment from dusk until dawn, searching for a hint, a clue, anything that could explain the impossible. He insisted that the slaves recount their activities, one by one, though he knew rationally that none could have accomplished such a feat alone. Every pause, every hesitation, every twitch in the eyes or hands of the workers was interpreted as evidence of guilt. The plantation, already a place ruled by superstition, became a tense and suffocating environment, where silence and suspicion governed interactions and the shadow of accusation hung over every action. The disappearance of the fortune also sparked envy, fear, and opportunism. Some slaves whispered that the wealth had been hidden away, secreted by the master himself, or by someone clever enough to evade detection. Others argued that the fortune had been spirited away by the six-fingered boy or some other agent with unnatural ability. Even those who doubted the supernatural were forced to navigate the swirling suspicions carefully. Any misstep could be interpreted as complicity, and the consequences were unthinkable. The balance of power shifted subtly but profoundly, as fear now ruled alongside labor and hierarchy. As the day wore on, the master's obsession deepened. He walked the plantation grounds, examining the soil for hidden signs, the riverbanks for footprints, the trees for evidence of concealment. Every detail became part of his mental map, a catalogue of possibilities and impossibilities. He consulted old texts, superstition manuals, and even past experiences, searching for precedent. He spoke of curses, fate, and punishment, convinced that human explanation alone could not account for the disappearance. Each passing hour without a solution heightened his paranoia and magnified the role of the six-fingered slave in his mind, whether the boy had any involvement or not. The slaves meanwhile watched the master with a mixture of fear and fascination. They understood that the disappearance could provoke retribution, yet they also recognized the absurdity of a fortune vanishing without trace. Whispers of luck and curse intertwined in their conversations, each story more elaborate than the last. The six-fingered slave, who had already been a figure of awe and suspicion, now became a symbol of the night's impossible event. Some claimed he had been seen moving mysteriously the evening before, though no one could confirm this, and others said that the extra finger itself had drawn the fortune into a realm beyond ordinary reach. Every interpretation, every rumor added weight to the mythos surrounding him, even as the real cause remained hidden. As days passed, the master's behavior became increasingly erratic. Sleep eluded him, and meals were skipped, replaced by obsessive pacing and constant review of what little information he had. He instructed the overseer to increase vigilance, to examine every corner of the estate, and to interrogate anyone who might have had knowledge of the missing item. No amount of explanation satisfied him, because his mind was fixated on the impossible, the sudden disappearance, the complete lack of evidence, and the notion that fate itself had intervened. Each passing hour reinforced his belief that the fortune had been taken by forces beyond human control, that some supernatural hand had snatched it away in a single night. Even the structure of the plantation seemed changed. Rooms that had once felt secure now felt vulnerable. Locks were checked obsessively, hidden compartments scrutinized, and the air itself seemed heavy with suspicion. Conversations were whispered, and eyes darted to the corners of rooms or the shadows along the hallway. The six-fingered slave moved through this tense environment with a cautious awareness, understanding that his every action was now observed with suspicion, that every gesture might be interpreted as evidence of some hidden power. The atmosphere was thick with tension, fear, and unspoken possibilities, and the invisible web of superstition tightened its grip on all who lived there. Even beyond the immediate circle of the plantation, stories of the vanished fortune began to circulate. Neighbors and travelers spoke of the mysterious disappearance, speculating wildly about what had happened. Some blamed the supernatural, others clever thieves, and still others the six-fingered boy. These tales fed back into the plantation's own paranoia, as the master considered the implications of his estate becoming the subject of gossip. The mystery of the vanished fortune, combined with the reputation of the boy, created a narrative that would endure far beyond that single night, shaping the way everyone thought about power, luck, and the unknowable forces that seemed to govern their lives. The master, upon discovering the plantation's fortune had vanished overnight, immediately cast his suspicion toward the six-fingered slave. For a man whose life was dictated by superstition, this was the most logical conclusion. The boy's unusual hand, already the subject of whispers and speculation, became a focal point for blame. To the master, the extra finger was not just a curiosity, it was a mark of something beyond ordinary understanding, a symbol that the boy might possess abilities that could explain the impossible disappearance. Every instinct, every fear, every belief in portents, pointed him toward the child as either the cause of the loss, or the key to recovering it. The accusation did not require evidence. The master had never needed evidence before. His decisions were driven by fear and interpretation of signs. He demanded that the overseer recount every detail of the boy's actions, scrutinizing times, movements, and gestures, reading them as if they were coded messages from fate itself. The overseer, already fearful of the master's temper, repeated everything he knew, though he had observed nothing unusual beyond the boy's normal task. He tried to rationalize, to suggest that someone else might have taken the fortune, that a natural explanation existed, but the master dismissed him. The six-fingered slave in his eyes represented the perfect convergence of anomaly and opportunity, and suspicion alone was enough to fix blame. Rumors among the other slaves intensified. The boy had already been the subject of fascination and fear, but now, with the fortune gone, stories escalated into outright accusations. Some claimed they had seen him lingering near the study the evening before, though no one could confirm it. Others whispered that the sixth finger itself was a conduit through which he could summon or attract fortune. These tales, born from fear, imagination, and a need to make sense of the impossible, spread through the quarters and fields like wildfire. The boy's every action was now scrutinized, exaggerated, and interpreted as proof of guilt, even though the truth remained unknown to all. The master confronted the boy directly, summoning him to the main hall. The child, still young but aware of the power dynamics around him, approached cautiously, sensing the tension radiating from the man who held authority over every aspect of his life. The master's eyes roamed over the six fingers, each movement calculated as if the hand itself were speaking a language only he could interpret. He demanded explanations, accusations spilling from his lips in a torrent of fear and certainty. The boy could only stand silently, knowing that any word or gesture might be used against him, that rational defense was meaningless in a world ruled by superstition and panic. The overseer watched anxiously, caught between his duty to the master and the unspoken understanding that the boy had done nothing to deserve blame. He attempted to intercede, to suggest that other possibilities be considered, but his words fell on deaf ears. The master's mind was consumed by the impossible. The fortune was gone,
and the boy's extraordinary hand must be connected. To suggest otherwise was to challenge forces the master believed he could not understand, and such challenges were intolerable. The atmosphere in the hall was heavy with accusation, fear and a mounting sense of dread, a place where reason had no place, and superstition ruled absolutely. Other slaves observed from a distance, hearts pounding, as they realized the dangerous position of the boy. They knew that the master's belief in omens was unyielding, and that being perceived as aligned with misfortune could invite punishment. Whispers spread through the quarters, some expressing sympathy for the boy, others offering theories that placed him at the center of the supernatural explanation for the disappearance. Everyone understood that in this climate, reality mattered less than perception. The six-fingered slave was caught in a web woven from fear, superstition, and the master's unshakable conviction that extraordinary events must have extraordinary cause. The boy's family and fellow workers tried to offer small defenses, subtle gestures meant to imply innocence without directly confronting the master's authority. Mothers whispered cautions to their children, workers avoided speaking unless summoned, and everyone tried to navigate the treacherous environment of accusation without drawing further suspicion. Yet, no precaution could fully protect him, because the master's mind was already set. In his eyes the six-fingered hand was evidence, the most visible sign of something beyond comprehension, and guilt or innocence mattered little compared to the narrative his superstition demanded. The master's obsession with the boy deepened with each passing day. He examined every movement, every glance, every work task performed by the six-fingered slave, seeking hidden meanings or signs of secret involvement. The boy's extraordinary dexterity, which had once been a curiosity, was now interpreted as capability for impossible feats. The way he handled tools, lifted objects, or even touched mundane items was scrutinized as if it might reveal the method by which the fortune had disappeared. Every action, no matter how innocent or necessary, became evidence in the master's eyes, reinforcing suspicion and amplifying fear. The psychological weight of accusation bore heavily on the boy. He had grown used to being watched, but now the scrutiny was intensified to an unbearable degree. Each step he took could be misread, each glance misinterpreted. The mere presence of the sixth finger, once a source of curiosity and whispered respect, had become a symbol of danger. He learned quickly to move cautiously, to minimize gestures that might draw attention, and to understand that in this environment, even the innocent could be treated as culpable. His life depended on navigating a world where perception outweighed reality, where superstition outweighed evidence, and where fear could determine outcomes as surely as any law. Meanwhile, the master reinforced the narrative of guilt through constant discussion with the overseer, other trusted workers, and even visitors. He insisted that the boy be observed more closely, that precautions be taken to prevent further misfortune, and that the mystery of the vanished fortune be tied directly to the six-fingered slave. In doing so, he created a climate of paranoia in which all eyes were on the boy, all movements recorded mentally, and all coincidences interpreted as evidence of hidden power or culpability. The plantation became a stage for fear, accusation, and superstition, and the boy was the central figure upon which the drama unfolded. Even as the days passed and no proof of involvement was found, the master's suspicion remained unshakable. Rational explanations, logic, and common sense were irrelevant in the face of the extraordinary and unexplainable. To him, the extraordinary disappearance of the fortune demanded an extraordinary agent, and in his mind there was no more extraordinary figure than the six-fingered slave. The boy's life, freedom, and even his safety were inextricably linked to a physical trait he could not control, a feature that others had turned into a symbol of fate itself, and a master whose belief in omens overruled reason. The six-fingered slave quickly learned that survival on the plantation demanded more than physical endurance. It required an acute awareness of suspicion, fear, and the whims of a master who trusted superstition over reason. Each day became a delicate negotiation, a constant balancing act between carrying out his duties and avoiding the interpretations that could cast him as the cause of the vanished fortune. Every glance, every motion of his six-fingered hand, every interaction with other slaves or overseers could be scrutinized, twisted into evidence, or used as justification for punishment. In this environment, survival was not simply a matter of obeying orders, it was a matter of reading people, understanding the invisible rules of superstition, and moving through shadows without tripping over unseen expectations. He had always been observant, but now observation became a weapon, a tool for navigating suspicion. He watched the master's moods, the sudden shifts in tone, the furrowing of brows, the almost imperceptible narrowing of eyes that signaled a brewing accusation. He watched the overseer, noting the hesitant steps, the careful words, the nervous glances exchanged with other workers. He watched his fellow slaves, interpreting whispers, gestures, and sidelong glances, learning who might protect him, who might betray him, and who might misread an innocent act as something sinister. Survival demanded constant vigilance, and in this climate, even small errors could carry catastrophic consequences. The superstition surrounding his 6 fingers became both a curse and a shield. On one hand, it made him a target. On the other, it created opportunity. Some of the slaves, believing in the mystical nature of the extra finger, treated him with a mixture of fear and respect, seeking his favor or avoiding actions that might anger him. The boy quickly learned to harness this perception subtly. He moved with care, allowing his dexterity and skill to be admired without overtly demonstrating any ability that might be interpreted as threatening. He discovered that the presence of the 6th finger, combined with measured gestures, could create a buffer against the harshest suspicion. Even as the master's obsession with it grew, he also began to notice patterns in human behavior. Fear could be manipulated, curiosity could be guided, and even superstition could be used strategically. When the master demanded answers, the boy learned to speak in ways that satisfied without revealing too much, to gesture without implying knowledge he did not possess, and to remain calm even when every instinct screamed panic. Each interaction became a careful performance, a balancing act that required patience, intelligence, and a nuanced understanding of human psychology. Mistakes were dangerous, yet inaction could also draw suspicion. The boy walked a narrow path where every step had to be measured, every motion deliberate. The fields and quarters became a theater of observation. The boy moved among the other slaves, performing his duties while absorbing information, watching for signs of shifting allegiances, noting reactions to the master's scrutiny, and learning the subtleties of attention and avoid. Children who played nearby were both distractions and sources of insight. Their unscripted actions revealed truths about fear, trust, and human behavior. Adults, too, often revealed intentions in fleeting gestures, a hand tightening, a glance, a second too long, a pause in speech. Every detail mattered. The 6-fingered slave had to interpret these details quickly, understanding their significance and adjusting his behavior accordingly. Yet there were moments of genuine tension that tested his skill. On particularly stressful days, the master's paranoia would escalate, and the entire plantation seemed to vibrate with accusation. Orders were barked, tasks scrutinized, and the smallest error magnified. The boy felt the invisible pressure tighten around him, aware that any mistake could be seized upon as proof of his involvement in the missing fortune. In these moments, survival depended not only on discretion but also on composure, on the ability to mask fear with calm, and on the capacity to read the invisible currents of human attention and expectation. Each day was a trial, a test of both intellect and nerve. The boy also learned the value of alliances, subtle connections that could provide small measures of protection. Certain slaves were more sympathetic, willing to offer warnings or guidance, while others, consumed by fear, would distance themselves, leaving him vulnerable. Understanding who might act in a crisis, who might speak on his behalf, and who might exploit suspicion for personal gain became essential. Every interaction was a negotiation, every word a potential shield or sword. In a place dominated by superstition, perception was power, and the boy learned to wield his presence with the skill of a master strategist. The master's obsession meanwhile intensified the stakes. Each day the 6-fingered slave was reminded of the vanished fortune and the impossible standards imposed upon him. The master would examine every task he completed, noting dexterity, efficiency, and subtle gestures, as if they held hidden meaning. A tool moved deftly, a basket lifted with unusual ease, or a glance at a chest could be interpreted as evidence of hidden power or clandestine involvement. The boy's ordinary skills became extraordinary in the eyes of the master, heightening both admiration and suspicion. Survival required an intricate dance of demonstrating ability while avoiding the perception of guilt or complicity. The psychological burden weighed heavily. The boy experienced moments of fear, doubt, and isolation. He could not speak freely, could not express frustration, and could not fully trust anyone. Every act of defiance, even minor, risked disaster. Every gesture of compliance carried its own dangers, yet he adapted, learning resilience, patience, and the subtle art of concealment. He discovered that silence, observation, and careful timing were as powerful as physical strength, and that the human mind, when guided by fear, could be more treacherous than any overseer or taskmaster. Despite the constant tension, the 6-fingered slave also began to develop an acute awareness of opportunity. In a place dominated by superstition and fear, he could influence perception, steer suspicion, and subtly protect himself by understanding the master's beliefs and the expectations of others. Every gesture of compliance, every subtle display of skill, and every careful avoidance of potential triggers became a tool for survival. The 6th finger, once simply an oddity, became an instrument of navigation in a world where trust was fragile, observation essential, and danger ever present. The plantation, in effect, became a living maze of observation, superstition, and human calculation. The six-fingered slave moved through it with the skill of someone attuned to both visible and invisible currents. He learned that survival was not about confrontation or rebellion, at least not yet, but about understanding the dynamics of fear, the power of perception, and the fragile balance between suspicion and admiration. Each day was a complex exercise in strategy, every action scrutinized and every motion a statement of innocence or power. The boy's life depended not only on what he did, but on how others interpreted it, and this awareness became central to his existence.
The whispers of other slaves about who might have taken the fortune were as varied as they were fervent. In the dimly lit quarters, the tales multiplied, each adding a new layer of intrigue to the mystery of the vanished wealth. Some insisted that the master's obsession with omens had blinded him to a simpler explanation. A clever outsider, someone unknown to the plantation, could have slipped through unnoticed, taking advantage of the night and the chaos of routine. Others argued that one of the older slaves, familiar with secret compartments and hiding places within the master's house, had orchestrated the theft, using careful planning and knowledge accumulated over years of servitude. The six-fingered boy, meanwhile, remained the subject of fascination and suspicion, even as theories about the true culprit diverged wildly. Among the quarters, speculation became a daily activity. Small gatherings formed at twilight when work had ended and the oppressive heat of the day subsided. Slaves leaned toward each other, speaking in hushed tones about shadows they had seen, strange movements they had noticed, or sounds that had gone unexplained. Some insisted that the fortune could not have been removed by mortal hands, citing the suddenness of its disappearance as evidence of supernatural involvement. They spoke of curses, portents, and destiny, weaving stories in which the six-fingered boy's unusual hand played a pivotal role. Others were more pragmatic, suggesting human cunning and cleverness, pointing to overlooked entrances, weak locks, or moments when the master's attention had been diverted. The master, oblivious to much of this speculation, fueled the fire through his own behavior. His obsession with finding the missing wealth led him to interrogate everyone, examine every corner of the plantation, and fixate on any minor anomaly that might provide a clue. His fear and superstition heightened the tension, making every glance, every gesture, and every remark subject to scrutiny. Slaves learned quickly that any comment, however innocent, could be twisted into evidence or rumor, feeding the master's growing paranoia. In this climate, even casual observations became dangerous, and everyone's actions were weighed against imagined consequences. The six-fingered slave, aware of the rumors and the attention they drew, learned to navigate them carefully. He watched the conversations, noting who seemed genuinely curious, who feared him, and who sought to manipulate the situation for their own gain. He understood that perception could be as powerful as reality, and that in a world dominated by superstition, a single misstep could be catastrophic. Each interaction became a calculated exercise, a subtle game of influence where his gestures, words, and even presence could alter the course of suspicion. Some of the older slaves developed elaborate theories about the fortune, integrating elements of superstition, observation, and imagination. They spoke of hidden tunnels, secret compartments, and objects that could be moved invisibly with skill or magic. They debated the likelihood of human versus supernatural intervention, sometimes arguing heatedly, other times exchanging knowing glances and silent nods. The six-fingered boy, whose abilities and anomalies were already a topic of legend, was frequently mentioned as either a participant or an observer with uncanny insight. These tales circulated widely, shaping perceptions and adding to the sense of mystery surrounding both the missing fortune and the boy himself. The six-fingered slave's daily life became a careful balance of routine and strategy. Every task performed in the fields, every interaction with the overseer, and every movement within the quarters was done with an awareness of the rumors circulating around him. He learned to perform duties with efficiency that seemed ordinary yet avoided any extraordinary display that could be misinterpreted. He observed reactions, adjusted his behavior, and used the attention drawn by his six fingers to create an aura of harmlessness, subtly deflecting suspicion without challenging the master or the prevailing beliefs. Meanwhile, the master's obsession began to ripple through the entire plantation. The tension in the quarters, once a subtle backdrop to daily labor, intensified. Workers moved cautiously, exchanging whispered speculations that could be overheard at any moment. Fear became a tool as much as a feeling. Slaves modified their behavior to align with expectations, hoping to avoid drawing attention or blame. The six-fingered boy, already under scrutiny, found that the rumors shaped not only how others treated him, but also the dynamics of power, respect, and influence across the plantation. Even simple actions became significant. If a servant dropped a tool or spoke too loudly, Observers might see a connection to the vanished fortune. If the six-fingered boy handled objects with skill, some interpreted it as evidence of involvement or hidden knowledge. Every event, minor or major, was analyzed, dissected, and incorporated into the ever-growing tapestry of rumor and speculation. The boy quickly learned to anticipate these reactions, using them to navigate the volatile landscape of fear and suspicion, and to protect himself in subtle, strategic ways. The older slaves, while fearful, also provided a sort of education for the boy. They shared stories, offered advice, and described ways to observe without drawing notice, to act without inviting suspicion. Some of these lessons were practical: how to handle tools efficiently, how to navigate the quarters silently, but many were lessons in perception, understanding human behavior, reading expressions, and interpreting silence and whisper. The six-fingered slave absorbed these lessons carefully, realizing that survival depended not only on skill or obedience but on the ability to read and influence the currents of rumor and fear. Rumors about the six-fingered boy and the missing fortune became a kind of shared narrative, a story that gave shape to the anxiety, uncertainty, and superstition of the plantation. They allowed slaves to discuss the impossible, speculate about hidden powers, and create order in a world that often seemed chaotic and dangerous. The boy's anomaly and the fortune's disappearance were intertwined, forming a legend that affected daily life, decisions, and interaction. The stories served as both warning and explanation, a way to navigate fear, and a way to make sense of events beyond ordinary understanding. Through all this, the boy learned a vital lesson: that perception could be more powerful than reality. The whispers, the accusations, the stories, they all influenced how people acted, how they feared, and how they respected or avoided him. His six fingers, once simply a physical oddity, had become a tool in this social landscape, a subtle form of leverage in a world dominated by superstition. By understanding the power of rumors and the weight of belief, the six-fingered slave could maneuver through danger, anticipate reactions, and shape interactions in ways that increased his chances of survival. The missing fortune, while an unsolved mystery, had transformed the social dynamics of the plantation. The master's obsession, the slave's speculation, and the boy's growing awareness of human behavior created a tense, intricate environment in which perception, rumor, and superstition carried enormous weight. Each day was a continuation of the night of the disappearance, a careful negotiation of fear, curiosity, and survival. The six-fingered slave moved within this web, learning, adapting, and understanding that the stories whispered about him, whether true or false, were as powerful as any physical skill he possessed. The sudden disappearance of the fortune sent waves of paranoia rippling through the plantation, reaching every corner from the master's house to the slave quarters. No one felt safe, and trust began to dissolve like sand through fingers. Each person questioned the actions of those around them, wondering who might have played a role in the loss. Ordinary mistakes were suddenly magnified into possible betrayals. A misplaced tool, a quiet conversation, or a moment of hesitation could be interpreted as evidence of complicity. The atmosphere, already tense from years of strict supervision and superstition, now carried a heavier, almost suffocating weight, where fear of accusation became as powerful as the threat of punishment itself. The master's obsession with omens grew even more pronounced. He began to see signs of misfortune in the smallest details: a candle that burned too quickly, a branch scraping against the window in the wind, even a bird that failed to sing at dawn became part of the narrative he wove about the missing fortune. Each sign reinforced his belief that extraordinary forces were at play and that ordinary explanations could not account for what had happened. The plantation became a stage on which his paranoia played out, and the six-fingered slave became central to the drama, whether by the master's design or by the interpretations of the community. The slaves themselves became detectives in their own way, trying to understand the inexplicable. They whispered theories in corners, comparing notes about strange occurrences, sudden opportunities, or unusual behavior they had observed in others. Some insisted the fortune had been taken by someone with exceptional skill or knowledge of hidden passages in the house. Others believed it had been spirited away by supernatural forces, a curse triggered by the master's hubris, or the unlucky presence of the six-fingered boy. The tension of not knowing, of imagining every possible scenario, created a shared anxiety that shaped daily life. Tasks were performed more cautiously, eyes darted to corners and shadows, and silence became a protective tool. The master's constant scrutiny made even the smallest tasks fraught with danger. The six-fingered slave, who had already learned to navigate observation and perception, now faced a heightened challenge. Every gesture of skill or dexterity could be interpreted as suspicious. Every interaction with tools, doors, or objects was watched for hidden meaning. Even moving from one area to another carried risk,
as the master or overseer could perceive intent or action where there was none. The boy became adept at subtlety, managing his presence carefully, ensuring that his abilities were neither flaunted nor hidden in a way that would attract unwanted attention. Rumors about the fortune's disappearance continued to evolve, fueled by imagination and fear. Stories circulated that the six-fingered boy had somehow caused the loss or had the power to summon it. Others suggested that the master himself had misplaced the treasure, and that the disappearance was an illusory punishment, a warning from higher powers rather than an act of theft. Even without direct evidence, each narrative carried the weight of possibility. The stories became self-reinforcing, as the fear they generated shaped behavior and perception. Slaves who might have otherwise acted freely began to modify every word and gesture, aware that any action could be seen as proof of guilt or complicity. The master's response intensified the climate of paranoia. He ordered increased vigilance, more frequent inspections, and stricter monitoring of all movements. Workers were watched more closely than ever, with suspicion as the underlying lens through which behavior was interpreted. The six-fingered boy, already under scrutiny, became a focal point for attention and speculation. His extraordinary dexterity, once a curiosity, was now viewed as a potential tool of mischief, or supernatural influence. The interplay of fear, superstition, and observation created an environment where rational explanation was overshadowed by the compelling need to assign blame and understand the impossible. Within this tense atmosphere, subtle manipulations and power plays emerged. Older slaves, recognizing the master's obsession and the heightened fear, sometimes leveraged the paranoia for protection or advantage. They offered advice, guidance or warnings about behavior, sometimes to shield themselves, sometimes to influence perception in their favor. The six-fingered boy observed all of this, learning that knowledge of human behavior was as valuable as any skill of the hand. Understanding motivations, predicting reactions, and navigating the labyrinth of fear and superstition became crucial strategies for survival. The fear of misfortune extended to even the most mundane activities. Harvesting, cleaning and carrying supplies were all performed under the weight of possible suspicion. Accidents, inevitable in any work environment, were scrutinized, reinterpreted, and sometimes magnified into proof of ill intent. A dropped basket could spark fear, a misplaced item could invite questioning, and every gesture could be examined for hidden meaning. The six-fingered boy, who had always been cautious, learned to adjust his movements further, blending skill with subtlety to avoid drawing attention to himself while continuing to perform his duties effectively. In addition to human observation, superstition itself seemed to take on a life of its own. The missing fortune became an almost mystical presence in conversations, thoughts, and action. People spoke of curses, omens and destiny as if the disappearance were an event dictated by forces beyond comprehension. The six-fingered boy, whose hand had long been a symbol of anomaly and fascination, became intertwined with these beliefs, a figure both feared and respected. His presence affected behavior in the quarters, the fields, and even in the master's house, where suspicion and superstition intersected in unpredictable ways. The dynamics of power on the plantation shifted subtly but profoundly. The master, consumed by the mystery of the missing fortune, exercised control more obsessively, while the overseers enforced rules with greater severity. Slaves in turn became more cautious, more attentive, and more adept at managing perception. The six-fingered boy, navigating this world with acute awareness, discovered that influence could be exerted without overt action. Observation, timing and the careful use of skill and presence became tools for navigating a landscape dominated by fear and superstition. Daily life was transformed into a constant negotiation with uncertainty. Every task, every movement, and every interaction carried potential consequences. The six-fingered boy developed an almost instinctive sense for when to act, when to remain silent, and how to interpret the behavior of others. He learned that perception could be manipulated, that rumors could be redirected, and that subtle gestures could convey innocence or skill without attracting suspicion. In a place where human behavior was inseparable from belief in the supernatural, mastery over perception became as vital as physical ability. Over time, the disappearance of the fortune left a lasting mark on the plantation. Fear, suspicion, and superstition became embedded in daily routine. The six-fingered boy, through careful observation and adaptation, managed to survive, learning lessons about perception, strategy and human psychology that would shape his understanding of the world. The vanished fortune became more than lost wealth. It became a force that influenced behavior, shaped interactions, and reinforced the power of fear and belief in ways that were impossible to quantify or control. The master's anxiety over the vanished fortune transformed into a near-constant obsession. He began to structure his days entirely around the search for answers, consulting books on superstition, old journals of family lore, and even the cryptic advice of fortune tellers he summoned from distant towns. His sleep was plagued by restless dreams, each vision interpreted as a clue or warning. Shadows on the walls, the shifting of objects in the house, and even the slightest misstep by the overseer or slaves became potential evidence. In this heightened state of fear, the six-fingered slave occupied an almost mythic place in his mind. The boy's unusual hand, once a source of curiosity or minor superstition, now represented a tangible connection to forces beyond understanding, a living symbol of power and misfortune intertwined. Among the slaves, tension thickened with each passing day. Stories of the fortune's disappearance circulated endlessly, gaining new details with every retelling. The six-fingered boy was often central to these narratives, portrayed sometimes as a conduit for supernatural intervention, sometimes as a cunning agent capable of outwitting both master and overseer. Even those who knew he had nothing to do with the loss dared not voice their certainty. To challenge the rumors was to risk invoking the master's wrath, or the subtle suspicions of fellow slaves who themselves were navigating the treacherous social landscape shaped by fear and superstition. The boy's awareness of the stories in the master's obsession shaped his daily conduct. Each movement required calculation, the way he handled tools, the way he carried baskets, and even the position of his hands were all performed with precision, to avoid drawing undue attention. He had long since recognized that his 6 fingers were no longer merely an anatomical anomaly. They were a symbol that could dictate his survival. In public, he moved with ordinary skill, avoiding extraordinary displays that might be misinterpreted. Yet in private, he practiced dexterity, learning to use the 6th finger as a means of control, balance and subtle influence, recognizing that mastery over perception could be as powerful as strength or speed. The plantation itself seemed to mirror the tension in the master's mind. The air was heavy with suspicion. Conversations were brief, measured, and cautious. Small mistakes were amplified, observed and interpreted with excessive scrutiny. Workers moved carefully, avoiding unnecessary gestures or actions that could be construed as suspicious. The 6-fingered boy navigated this world with a combination of caution and skill, becoming increasingly adept at reading human behavior and manipulating perception. Even the simple act of carrying a load of crops or walking from the fields to the quarters required awareness of invisible lines of observation, subtle balances of attention, and anticipation of possible interpretation. The master's fixation on superstition intensified as he observed patterns that he believed were connected to the boy. Ordinary occurrences, such as a tool being handled with precision, a sudden gust of wind, or a subtle change in animal behavior, were interpreted as messages or warnings. He insisted that the overseer monitor the boy constantly, and he questioned him frequently about mundane tasks as if they might contain hidden significance. The boy's every gesture, previously unnoticed or neutral, became charged with potential meaning. Each day was a test of patience, composure and strategic understanding, and the weight of expectation and suspicion pressed down with increasing intensity. Meanwhile, the older slaves took advantage of the atmosphere to manipulate perception subtly. They passed along observations, whispered warnings, or offered advice that shaped the way others acted around the boy. Some used these rumors to protect themselves or to maintain influence in the quarters, subtly directing suspicion away from themselves. Others acted out of fear, ensuring that the boy remained at the center of attention so that the master's obsession would not shift onto them. The 6-fingered slave, aware of these dynamics, learned to navigate both the visible and invisible hierarchies, understanding that survival depended as much on human psychology as on physical skill or knowledge. The rumors about the boy also created unexpected forms of respect. Many younger slaves watched him closely, impressed by his skill and caution. They whispered of his ability to handle tasks others could not, speculated about the 6th finger's mystical properties, and sometimes sought his guidance or assistance. The boy in turn understood the power of perception. By maintaining a careful balance of skill, humility and distance, he could command attention, shape the narrative and protect him. His reputation, whether deserved or not, became a tool for survival, influencing behavior and expectations without overt confrontation. The master's paranoia created a web of observation that reached far beyond the immediate household. Visitors, neighboring plantation owners, and traveling merchants began to notice the tension and oddities in behavior. Rumors leaked outward, carrying stories of the vanished fortune and the extraordinary abilities of a 6-fingered slave. Each retelling added new details, embellishments or interpretations, and the legend grew beyond the plantation itself. Within the estate, however, the boy remained the epicenter of attention, skillfully maneuvering through suspicion, rumor and superstition, to maintain both safety and autonomy where possible. In the quarters, stories continued to evolve. Some claimed the boy had caused the fortune's disappearance, others that he had merely witnessed events beyond ordinary perception. Every tale reflected a need to explain the impossible, to create order out of chaos, and to assign meaning to events that seemed otherwise senseless. The six-fingered slave learned to use these stories to his advantage, recognizing that human belief was malleable, and that perception could be guided with subtlety. He practiced careful timing, deliberate gestures, and measured speech, understanding that influence often came not from direct action, but from control of narrative and observation. The boy's development of skill and strategy became intertwined with survival itself. Each day demanded constant adaptation, reading moods, predicting reactions, and adjusting behavior to avoid triggering the master's paranoia, or the suspicion of others. Ordinary labor tasks, lifting, carrying, preparing food, cleaning, and field work, were now layered with an additional dimension of caution and calculation. The boy's awareness of every observer, every potential interpretation, and every ripple of rumor sharpened his mind, fostering intuition, foresight, and resilience. These were tools of survival as essential as any physical skill, and they became ingrained habits that defined his daily life. The environment of superstition, rumor, and obsession also created unexpected lessons. The boy learned patience, subtlety, and the ability to influence perception without confrontation. He discovered that understanding human psychology, the motivations, fears, and expectations of others, was as critical as physical ability or intelligence. He became attuned to patterns of behavior, capable of predicting reactions, and able to navigate complex social dynamics with a mixture of caution and insight. His six fingers, once an anomaly that invited curiosity or fear, became part of a broader strategy of survival, perception, and influence, marking him as someone who could endure the unpredictable and often dangerous world around him.
The tension on the plantation reached a peak as the days following the fortune's disappearance stretched into weeks. The master, driven by obsession and superstition, became increasingly erratic in his commands. He scrutinized every movement of the six-fingered slave, convinced that his unusual hand somehow contained the key to understanding the impossible events. Ordinary tasks, carrying water, tending to livestock, sweeping floors, were interpreted as signs of hidden ability, a dexterity that could either conceal or reveal truth. The boy, aware of the attention, learned to conduct himself with precision, ensuring that each gesture, glance, or motion maintained an equilibrium that neither provoked suspicion nor invited praise that could be misconstrued. Among the other slaves, the six-fingered boy had become a central figure in a web of fear, curiosity, and storytelling. He was alternately revered and dreaded, the subject of whispered conversations, subtle glances, and cautious movements. Some claimed that he possessed extraordinary foresight, that he could anticipate events before they occurred, while others believed he wielded influence over unseen forces, guiding outcomes with his sixth finger. Every story reinforced the aura of mystique surrounding him, blending truth and exaggeration until it was impossible to separate fact from fiction. Yet, the boy's awareness of these perceptions allowed him to navigate the dangerous social landscape with skill, using the mythology as a protective tool while avoiding the trap of overexposure. The master's obsession bled into every corner of the estate. He demanded constant reports from the overseer, who was himself under pressure to interpret both the boy's actions and the reactions of other slaves. Minor anomalies, a slight hesitation, a furtive glance, a dropped tool, were analyzed and interpreted as potential evidence. The six-fingered slave became the focal point of this scrutiny, his every move magnified, his presence treated as a possible catalyst for events. Survival required more than obedience. It required subtlety, intelligence, and an acute awareness of human psychology. The boy had to anticipate suspicion before it arose and modulate his behavior accordingly, mastering the delicate art of visibility and invisibility. Rumors about the missing fortune evolved into elaborate narratives, blending superstition, observation, and imagination. Some slaves claimed that the fortune had been taken through magical means, influenced by the boy's sixth finger. Others suggested that a secretive plot had been enacted by an outsider, cleverly exploiting vulnerabilities in the plantation's defenses. Every account was laden with meaning, each retelling reinforcing fear and respect for the boy. The shared narrative shaped daily routines. Slaves moved cautiously, avoided unnecessary conversation, and observed each other closely, aware that missteps could have consequences far beyond the ordinary scope of punishment. The six-fingered slave learned to exploit these perceptions subtly. He developed an understanding of how rumors shaped behavior, how fear could be channeled, and how visibility could be controlled. He performed his work with careful efficiency, showing skill and competence without exaggeration, allowing others to believe in his capabilities without drawing direct attention. He recognized that his physical anomaly had become a symbol of influence, a representation of power that could be wielded indirectly. By controlling perception, he maintained a measure of autonomy and safety, even in a world dominated by superstition, fear, and suspicion. The master's obsession created ripple effects across the plantation hierarchy. Overseers grew anxious, fearing that even their minor misjudgments could implicate them in imagined schemes. Ordinary slaves, cautious and fearful, modified behavior to avoid drawing attention, and small acts delivering supplies, tending livestock, sweeping floors became laden with significance. Every gesture, sound, and movement was potentially scrutinized for hidden meaning. Within this complex ecosystem, the six-fingered slave operated with awareness, learning to interpret intentions, predict reactions, and navigate the subtle politics of observation and superstition. The boy's understanding of human behavior deepened as he observed interactions between the master, overseers, and slaves. He recognized patterns, the slight hesitation before a command, the nervous glance exchanged between two workers, the way attention shifted subtly when a particular subject was mentioned. He understood that survival depended on both physical skill and psychological acuity. In this environment, the sixth finger was no longer merely a physical curiosity. It had become a symbol of strategic advantage, a tool for influencing perception and steering the subtle currents of fear and attention around him. The social dynamics of the quarters were equally affected. Slaves whispered theories, speculated about potential culprits for the missing fortune, and debated the boy's abilities. Some older slaves offered guidance, subtly shaping the boy's behavior to protect him, while others exploited the tension to enhance their own position or avoid scrutiny. The six-fingered slave learned to navigate these networks of influence carefully, recognizing that both allegiance and distance were tools for survival. He balanced interactions to minimize risk, maintain safety, and preserve the delicate equilibrium that allowed him to endure in an environment governed as much by superstition as by labor and authority. The master's perception of causality became increasingly distorted. Ordinary coincidences, an animal behaving unpredictably, a door left slightly ajar, a tool missing temporarily, were interpreted as connected to the boy or the vanished fortune. The extraordinary nature of the disappearance had reframed the master's understanding of reality, forcing him to see hidden meaning in every minor event. For the six-fingered slave, this meant constant vigilance. Survival required a sophisticated understanding of narrative and belief, the ability to act in ways that satisfied observation without inviting direct scrutiny, and the capacity to navigate a world in which perception was more powerful than evidence. Even mundane routines acquired layers of complexity. Working in the fields, tending livestock, preparing meals, each task demanded attentiveness, timing, and awareness of observation. The six-fingered boy adapted, using subtlety to influence perception. A deft movement of the hand could be seen as mere skill, or as something extraordinary. A carefully measured pause could divert attention or reinforce credibility. Each day became a delicate interplay between action and interpretation, skill and subtlety, visibility and concealment. In mastering this interplay, the boy cultivated not only practical survival strategies but also a nuanced understanding of human psychology and social dynamics. The vanished fortune and the obsession it inspired became a permanent presence, shaping interactions, routines, and perceptions across the plantation. Fear, suspicion, and superstition created a landscape in which survival depended as much on intellect and perception as on physical capability. The six-fingered slave, through observation, strategy, and the subtle use of his anomaly, maintained a delicate balance of safety and influence. The environment, though oppressive, became a classroom in which he developed skills that extended far beyond ordinary labor: strategic thinking, psychological acuity, subtle manipulation, and an understanding of the power of myth and perception. Every day reinforced a critical lesson that survival depended on managing not only one's own actions but also the interpretations of others. The six-fingered slave became adept at anticipating suspicion, controlling visibility, and influencing narratives without overt confrontation. He recognized that in a world dominated by superstition, the mere belief in extraordinary power could shape reality as effectively as any physical intervention. His sixth finger, once a curiosity or source of fear, had become an instrument in this strategy, a symbol, a tool, and a guide for navigating the complex, dangerous, and unpredictable world in which he lived. As the nights stretched into weeks, the mystery of the vanished fortune became a force that reshaped the entire plantation. The master's obsession reached a fever pitch. He could neither rest nor think clearly, haunted by the impossible disappearance and convinced that dark powers were at play.
His superstition twisted every mundane occurrence into evidence of hidden forces, and every shadow, flicker, or misplaced object became a portent. The six-fingered slave, meanwhile, had mastered the art of invisibility in plain sight, navigating suspicion with patience, intelligence, and subtlety that rivaled the master's own cunning. Then, one evening, as a storm approached and the wind rattled the windows of the plantation house, the truth, or what the world would come to accept as truth, revealed itself. It was not brute strength, clever theft, or supernatural ability that had caused the fortune to vanish. It was human cunning, strategy, and patience, embodied in the quiet vigilance and careful observation of the six-fingered boy. His extraordinary hand, once a source of superstition, had allowed him to access places overlooked by others, move objects with precision, and manipulate perception in ways that no one, not the master, not the overseer, and not even the other slaves, could have imagined. Under the cover of night, guided by intuition and understanding of fear, he orchestrated the final act. The fortune, stored in its hidden compartments and safeguarded by years of habit, was quietly relocated. The movement was seamless. No lock was broken, no sound disturbed the night, and no witness could have anticipated the action. The boy's dexterity, enhanced by the sixth finger, allowed him to operate with a subtlety impossible for ordinary hands. In doing so, he transformed the legend surrounding his anomaly from one of fear into one of awe. By morning, when the master stormed through the house again, expecting to find some trace, some clue, he found nothing. The fortune had disappeared entirely. Panic and superstition collided in his mind. He accused everyone, searched every inch, but the impossible had happened again. The master began to see the six-fingered boy not merely as a figure of curiosity or superstition, but as a force he could neither comprehend nor control. The boy's calm, measured presence, once a liability, had become his shield. In the absence of evidence, the master's fear became his own undoing, for obsession without understanding leads only to desperation. In the aftermath, the six-fingered slave emerged not as a criminal, but as a quiet architect of survival and agency. The wealth was hidden, safeguarded, or redirected in ways that allowed him to leverage its power without confrontation. Other slaves who had observed, speculated, and whispered came to understand that the boy's anomaly was not simply physical. It was a symbol of intellect, perception, and mastery over fear. He had turned superstition into strategy, observation into influence, and survival into art. The plantation itself remained a place of labor, fear, and hierarchy. But the legend of the six-fingered boy endured. The master, haunted by his obsession and superstition, never discovered the truth. He became a cautionary figure, a man undone not by theft or rebellion, but by his own inability to understand the forces at play in the lives of those he sought to control. Meanwhile, the boy, once a figure of fear, became an invisible power, quietly shaping events, guiding perception, and demonstrating that even in the most oppressive circumstances, intelligence, observation, and cunning could achieve what brute force or superstition could not. And so the story of the six-fingered slave, the superstitious master, and the fortune that disappeared overnight became a legend whispered across plantations and quarters, a tale of fear, dexterity, and the quiet triumph of human ingenuity. The boy's sixth finger, once a mark of difference, became a symbol of possibility, the reminder that survival, strategy, and courage could turn superstition into an instrument of empowerment, and that sometimes the greatest power lay not in wealth, but in the mind and hands of the one no one could predict.